The rain fell in sheets across the broken streets of Yokohama, turning rubble into rivers of ash and memory. August 1945 had ended the war, but it had not ended the fear. Keiko stood beneath the awning of what had once been a silk merchant's shop, now reduced to charred beams and salvaged canvas. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small wooden comb, the only possession that connected her to the person she had been before the recruiters came to her village 3 years ago. The comb had belonged to her grandmother, carved with cherry blossoms that seemed to mock the desolation surrounding her now. Across the muddy street, a line of young women waited in silence. 23 of them, ranging from 17 to 28 years old. They had been told to report here by the Japanese authorities who still clung to whatever power remained in the occupation's shadow. The instructions had been vague, delivered with averted eyes and hushed voices. "The Americans are coming," the official had said. "They will need accommodations. You will serve your country one final time." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Keiko understood what that meant. They all did. For years, they had been forced to serve. In comfort stations from Manchuria to the Philippines, their bodies treated as military supplies, their names replaced with numbers, their futures deleted with each passing day. Now, with Japan defeated and American forces pouring into the country, the pattern would simply repeat with different uniforms, different languages, different hands. Beside Keiko stood Yumiko, a girl from Osaka with a scar above her left eyebrow where a drunken officer had struck her with a bottle. Yumiko had stopped speaking months ago, communicating only through nods and the occasional squeeze of a hand. But now, as thunder rolled across the gray sky, she leaned close to Keiko and whispered her first words in what felt like a lifetime. "Do you think they will be worse?" Keiko had no answer. She had heard stories, propaganda really, about the brutality of American soldiers, how they were savages who would ravage and destroy everything in their path. But she had also heard stories about the Japanese Imperial Army, and those had all proven true. She had lived those truths in rooms that smelled of disinfectant and shame, in silence broken only by the sounds of violation and the distant echo of military marches. "I don't know," Keiko finally replied, her voice barely audible above the rain. "But I know we have survived this long. We will survive whatever comes next." A military truck rumbled around the corner, its tires throwing up waves of dirty water. The canvas covering its bed bore the white star of the American forces. Keiko's stomach tightened. This was it, the moment when their new reality would begin. She closed her eyes and pressed the wooden comb against her palm until the carved edges bit into her skin. A small pain to anchor her against the larger terror approaching. The truck stopped. 2 Japanese officials emerged from a nearby building, both men who had organized the comfort stations during the war, now acting as intermediaries between the defeated and the victors. They began calling names from a list, directing women into groups. Keiko heard her name and moved forward mechanically, her feet heavy with dread. But then something unexpected happened. The Americans who climbed down from the truck weren't leering or aggressive. They were young. Some looked barely older than boys, and they carried themselves with an exhaustion that seemed to match the women's own weariness. One soldier, tall with red hair and freckles, caught Keiko's eye and immediately looked away, his face flushing with what appeared to be embarrassment. A translator stepped forward, a Japanese-American soldier whose crisp English contrasted sharply with his formal Japanese. "Ladies," he said, bowing slightly in a gesture that stunned them all. No one had bowed to them in years. "My name is Sergeant Tanaka. I've been asked to explain the situation. The United States Army is establishing temporary housing for displaced persons. You've been selected to receive assistance, food, shelter, medical care. We understand that many of you have been victims of the comfort station system." The word victims hung in the air like something fragile and foreign. Keiko glanced at Yumiko, whose eyes had widened in confusion. The translator continued, "You are not being conscripted. You are not being forced into service. You will be housed in a supervised facility where you'll receive 3 meals per day, clean clothing, and access to doctors. If you have family you wish to return to, we will help you make contact. If you have nowhere to go, You will be given assistance in finding work, legitimate work, in the rebuilding efforts. One of the older women, Haruko, who had survived comfort stations in 3 different countries, stepped forward. Her voice was hoarse from years of swallowed screams. What do you want from us in return? Sergeant Tanaka's expression softened with something that looked like pain. Nothing, he said. Absolutely nothing. You've already given far too much. The women stood in stunned silence. The rain continued to fall, but the world seemed to have shifted on some invisible axis. Keiko felt Yumiko's hand slip into hers, squeezing so tightly that bones pressed together. An anchor against the possibility that this might be another lie, another cruelty dressed up as mercy. The red-haired soldier approached with a stack of blankets, offering them to the nearest women. When he reached Keiko, he held one out but didn't push it toward her. He waited, letting her decide whether to take it. His eyes were blue, a color Keiko had only seen in paintings, and they held no hunger, no expectation, only a kind of careful respect that made her throat tighten with emotion she couldn't name. She took the blanket. It was thick and dry, marked with U.S. Army in block letters. The soldier nodded once and moved on to the next woman, maintaining a respectful distance that seemed almost unnatural given everything they had been trained to expect. They were loaded onto trucks, not roughly, but with hands offered to help them climb up, with patience when someone moved slowly. The Japanese officials watched from the sidelines, their expressions unreadable. Keiko wondered what they were thinking. These men who had profited from suffering and now stood witness to its potential end. Current word count: 1,087 words. The facility was a converted school on the outskirts of the city, far enough from the main occupation zones to offer some privacy but close enough to military protection. As the trucks pulled through the gates, Keiko saw more women, hundreds of them, standing in the courtyard, talking quietly among themselves. Some wore the distinctive clothing of former comfort women. Others looked like refugees from bombed-out neighborhoods, or women who had worked in factories, or farm girls displaced by the chaos of defeat. Inside, the building had been cleaned and organized with military efficiency. The classrooms had been converted into dormitories, with cots lined up in neat rows. Each bed had sheets, a pillow, and a folded set of clothes. In one corner, a medical station had been set up, staffed by American nurses and a Japanese doctor who had been vetted by the occupation authorities. Sergeant Tanaka guided their group to the second floor, explaining as they walked. This facility houses approximately 400 women. Meals are served 3 times daily in the cafeteria downstairs. There's a bathing area with hot water available from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. A counselor, both Japanese and American staff, are available if you need someone to talk to. Rules are simple. Respect each other, no violence, and feel free to come and go during daylight hours. After dark, for your own safety, we ask that you remain on the grounds. They reached their assigned dormitory, a large room that had once held desks and blackboards, now fitted with 20 beds. The windows had been repaired, and curtains hung on simple rods, giving the space a sense of privacy that felt almost sacred after years of exposed vulnerability. Choose any bed, Sergeant Tanaka said. Dinner is at 6. Someone will come by to show you the way. He paused at the door, then turned back. I know you have no reason to trust us. Trust must be earned. But I promise you, and I speak for every American soldier in this facility, you will be treated with the dignity and respect you deserve. What was done to you was a war crime. We're here to help you heal, not to add to your suffering. After he left, the women stood in silence, staring at the beds as if they might disappear. Finally, Haruko moved first, walking to a cot near the window and sitting down slowly, testing its reality. The bed didn't vanish. The sheets were real. She ran her hand across the pillow and then, quite suddenly, began to cry. That broke something open. One by one, the women moved to beds and sat or lay down, and several of them wept, not with the silent tears they had perfected in the comfort stations, but with deep, shaking sobs that came from a place beyond words. Keiko found herself on a bed beside Yumiko, and when she felt the tears start, she didn't try to stop them. She cried for the 3 years stolen from her life, for the girl from the village who had believed the recruiter's promises of factory work, for all the nights she had survived by pretending she was somewhere else, someone else. Yumiko's hand found hers again, and they held on to each other as if they were drowning, as if the beds might turn back into the thin mats they had known, as if the Americans might burst through the door at any moment with demands and violence. But nobody came. The afternoon light stretched across the floor, golden and peaceful. Somewhere downstairs, someone was cooking. Keiko could smell rice and vegetables. Real food in quantities that suggested abundance rather than survival. A bird sang outside the window, oblivious to human suffering and human mercy alike. When evening approached, a young American woman in a Red Cross uniform knocked gently on the doorframe before entering. She had kind eyes and a warm smile, and she spoke in careful, simple English while a Japanese woman translated. "Good evening. My name is Dorothy, and I'm here to show you to the dining hall. There's no rush, come when you're ready. The food will be kept warm." In groups of 2 and 3, the women followed. The dining hall had been set up in the school's former gymnasium, with long tables and benches arranged in rows. The food line was organized cafeteria style, with large pots of rice, miso soup, pickled vegetables, grilled fish, and even some bread. A strange addition, but welcome. American soldiers served the food, but they didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't stare, didn't make the women feel like objects on display. Keiko took her tray to a table where Yumiko and several others had gathered. They ate in silence at first, savoring the taste of food that hadn't been rationed or withheld as punishment. Then, gradually, conversation began to bloom, tentative at first, then growing stronger. "I'm from Hiroshima," one woman said quietly. Her name was Michiko, and her hands shook slightly as she held her chopsticks. "My family, I don't know if they survived the bomb. They sent me to Manchuria in 1942. I haven't heard anything since." "We can help you find out," Dorothy said, having joined their table with a cup of tea. The translator conveyed her words. "We have people working on reconnecting families. It takes time, but we're getting better at it every day." Michiko's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that?" "Of course," Dorothy replied. "You're not alone anymore. None of you are." As Keiko looked around the dining hall, she saw something she hadn't witnessed in years. Women smiling, sharing food, speaking without fear. The American soldiers maintained their respectful distance, but occasionally one would catch a woman's eye and nod. A simple acknowledgement of shared humanity that felt revolutionary after so much dehumanization. That night, lying in the clean bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Keiko held her grandmother's comb and allowed herself to imagine something she thought she had lost forever. A future. Not the future that had been stolen from her. The one where she married a farmer from her village, bore children, grew old watching cherry blossoms fall each spring. That future was gone, replaced by scars both visible and hidden. But perhaps there was another future possible. One where she rebuilt herself piece by piece. Where she learned to live without flinching at footsteps. Where the word woman didn't automatically mean victim. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Yumiko whisper in the darkness, "Thank you for staying with me." "Always," Keiko whispered back. And she meant it. They had survived the unsurvivable. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Section 1 word count. 2,134 words. The first week at the facility unfolded like a dream that Keiko kept expecting to turn into a nightmare. But the nightmare never came. Instead, routines developed, small, ordinary rhythms that felt almost absurdly normal given everything they had endured. Each morning began with the gentle ring of a bell at 7 o'clock. A sound so different from the harsh shouts and banging doors of the comfort stations that Keiko sometimes woke in confusion, unsure where she was. The bathing area became a sanctuary, a place where women could wash away more than just dirt. The first time Keiko submerged herself in genuinely hot water, she stayed until her skin pruned and her muscles went slack, letting the heat seep into bones that had been cold for years. Yumiko began speaking more frequently, though her voice remained soft, as if she had forgotten how to project sound beyond a whisper. One morning, while they were folding their sheets, a task no one required but that they did anyway, out of habit or perhaps out of a need to contribute something, Yumiko said, "I used to sing." Before. Before was a word they all used. a demarcation between the world that had existed and the world that had replaced it. Before meant family, home, innocence, choice. Before meant being human in the fullest sense. What did you sing? Keiko asked, tucking the corners of her sheets with precision. Folk songs. My mother taught me. We used to sing while working in the rice paddies. Yumiko's hands stilled on the fabric. I don't know if I remember the words anymore. Maybe they'll come back, Keiko offered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Some things once lost stayed lost. But she wanted to give Yumiko hope, wanted to believe that pieces of their former selves could be recovered and reassembled into something whole. The facility operated on principles that seemed designed to restore agency to women who had been stripped of it. Meals were served at set times, but no one was forced to attend. Classes were offered, reading and writing for those who had never learned or had forgotten, basic mathematics, even English lessons taught by enthusiastic American teachers who treated their students with genuine respect. Attendance was voluntary. Everything was voluntary. After years of having no choice in anything, the abundance of choices felt overwhelming. Current word count, 2,567 words. Keiko found herself drawn to the garden that was being cultivated in the school's former playground. Several women had begun the project spontaneously, clearing debris and planting seeds donated by local farmers who were slowly warming to the American presence. Keiko had grown up helping her family tend their small vegetable plot, and the feel of soil under her fingernails brought back memories that were bittersweet, reminders of home, of the person she had been. Working beside her most days was Yumiko, a woman in her late 20s who had been taken from Tokyo and sent to a comfort station in Burma. Yumiko had a practical nature and a dry sense of humor that occasionally broke through her carefully maintained reserve. One afternoon, while they were planting radish seeds, Yumiko said, "You know what's strange? I keep waiting for someone to tell me I'm doing this wrong, that I need to work faster, or that I've made a mistake. But no one does." Keiko understood. They had both been conditioned to expect criticism, punishment, violence for the smallest infractions or for no infractions at all, simply because someone in power felt like dispensing cruelty. The absence of that violence created a void that was difficult to fill with anything but anxiety. Maybe that means we're doing it right, Keiko suggested, patting soil around a seed. Or maybe it means they don't care enough to correct us, Yumiko countered. But there was no real bitterness in her tone, just the observation of someone who had learned not to trust kindness too quickly. The American soldiers who guarded the facility, though guarded seemed the wrong word, as they were more like distant sentries, maintained their respectful distance. Keiko learned their names through observation and occasional brief interactions. There was Private Miller, the red-haired young man who had offered her the first blanket. He couldn't have been more than 20, with an earnest face that flushed easily whenever he had to speak with any of the women. There was Corporal Washington, a tall black man whose presence had initially startled some of the women, not from prejudice, but simply because they had never seen someone with dark skin before. He had the kindest smile Keiko had ever seen on a soldier, and he spent his free time fixing things around the facility. A broken chair, a leaking faucet, a door that wouldn't close properly, always asking permission before entering any space. And there was Sergeant Tanaka, the translator, who seemed to carry the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. His Japanese was formal but fluent, marked by the accent of someone who had learned the language from parents who had emigrated. He conducted weekly meetings where women could voice concerns or ask questions, and he never dismissed anything as trivial. When one woman complained that the tea served at breakfast was too weak, he made sure stronger tea was available the next day. Current word count, 2,988 words. But not everything was peaceful. Trauma had a way of surfacing in unexpected moments, triggered by sounds or smells or the particular angle of light through a window. Keiko witnessed women who froze mid-conversation, their eyes going distant as they retreated into memories they couldn't escape. She saw women who woke screaming in the night, their terror contaminating the darkness until others woke too, and they all sat in silence, waiting for dawn. Keiko had her own moments. One afternoon, a door slammed somewhere in the building. Just a gust of wind, nothing sinister, but the sound shot through her like electricity. Suddenly she was back in the comfort station in Manila, where doors slamming meant officers arriving, meant the beginning of another endless night. Her breath came in short gasps, and her vision tunneled. She couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the certainty that violence was approaching. Then Yumiko was there, her hand on Keiko's shoulder, her voice cutting through the panic. "Breathe with me. In 2, 3, 4. Out 2, 3, 4. You're here. You're safe." It was just the wind. It took several minutes for Keiko's heart to slow, for the present to reassert itself over the past. When it did, she felt exhausted and ashamed. Ashamed that she couldn't simply move forward, couldn't leave the trauma behind through sheer force of will. "It happens to all of us," Yumiko said, as if reading her thoughts. Michiko couldn't go near the medical station for 3 days because the smell of disinfectant made her sick. Haruko won't let anyone walk behind her. She always needs to see everyone in the room. We're all carrying this. The counselors, both the Japanese woman named Mrs. Nakamura and the American woman Dorothy, encouraged the women to talk about their experiences, but never forced it. Mrs. Nakamura had gentle eyes and a quiet manner that made her seem almost grandmotherly, despite being only in her 40s. She conducted individual sessions and group meetings, always emphasizing that healing wasn't linear, that setbacks weren't failures. "You survived," she told them again and again. "That took strength most people will never need to summon. Give yourselves credit for that. And give yourselves permission to take as much time as you need." Keiko began attending the English classes, partly because she thought the skill might be useful, but mostly because learning something new gave her a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The teacher was a young American woman named Helen, who had volunteered with the Red Cross and stayed on to help with education programs. She taught them basic phrases with infinite patience, never showing frustration when someone struggled with pronunciation. "Hello, my name is Keiko," Keiko repeated, feeling the strange syllables shape themselves in her mouth. English was so different from Japanese, harsher in some ways but also more direct. There was something appealing about that directness after years of speaking in careful euphemisms designed to minimize offense and punishment. Private Miller sometimes assisted in the English classes, helping with pronunciation and serving as a conversation partner. He was painfully shy, especially when working one-on-one with the women. One afternoon, when he was helping Keiko practice basic questions and answers, his face turned bright red, and he stammered over simple words. "I'm sorry," he finally said in English, then switched to the few Japanese words he'd learned. "Gomen nasai. I'm not very good at this." Through the translator who happened to be present, Keiko asked, "Why did you volunteer to help?" Miller's expression turned serious. "My sister, she's about your age. If something like this had happened to her, I'd want someone to help her, to treat her with respect. That's all I'm trying to do." Current word count, 3,635 words. It was the first time one of the soldiers had volunteered anything personal, had bridged the gap between helper and helped with a glimpse of their own humanity. Keiko found herself curious about these Americans, these men who seemed so different from the soldiers she had known. What were their lives like? What had they seen in the war? And how had they learned to see the comfort women as victims rather than as the tools their own military had used? She learned fragments through observation and occasional conversations. Many of the American soldiers were young, 18, 19, 20 years old, barely out of boyhood themselves. They had fought in the Pacific, had seen horrors on beaches and in jungles, had watched friends die. Some carried visible scars. Others carried the invisible kind, the type that manifested in nightmares and sudden silences. Corporal Washington had been in the Philippines, had helped liberate a prisoner of war camp where Allied soldiers had been starved and tortured. "I've seen what cruelty looks like," he told Sergeant Tanaka during one of the weekly meetings. His words translated for the women present. "I've seen what it does to people. No one deserves that. No one." The women began to understand that they weren't the only ones trying to make sense of what the war had done. The Americans were also navigating trauma, also trying to separate the people from the propaganda, also learning that humanity persisted even in the aftermath of massive inhumanity. But trust was fragile. One day, a new group of soldiers arrived at the facility, replacements for some who were being rotated back to the States. These new arrivals hadn't been briefed as thoroughly, hadn't internalized the protocols about respect and distance. One of them, a sergeant with a swagger in his step and a smirk on his face, whistled at a group of women crossing the courtyard. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The effect was instantaneous. The women froze, their bodies tensing with recognition of a predatory attention they knew too well. One woman dropped the basket she was carrying and backed away, her hand over her mouth. Another began to cry. Sergeant Tanaka appeared within seconds, his face dark with fury. The confrontation was mostly in English, too rapid for most of the women to follow, but the tone was unmistakable. The new sergeant tried to defend himself. "I was just being friendly." But Tanaka cut him off with words that cracked like a whip. Within minutes, the offending soldier was removed from the facility, reassigned elsewhere. Tanaka gathered the women who had witnessed the incident. "I apologize," he said, bowing deeply, a gesture that still shocked them every time they saw it. "That soldier has been removed. He will not return. What happened was unacceptable, and it will not happen again. You have my word." The incident left ripples of anxiety through the facility for days. Women who had started to relax became hypervigilant again. Keiko found herself checking over her shoulder more often, tensing at the sound of male voices. The fragile sense of safety had been cracked, reminding them all how easily it could shatter completely. But the response mattered too. The fact that the soldier had been removed immediately, that Tanaka had apologized without making excuses, that the rules weren't just words but actual protections. All of this helped repair the crack. Slowly, cautiously, the women began to relax again. As weeks turned into a month, then two, the facility evolved from a shelter into something resembling a community. The women developed friendships, rivalries, shared projects. The garden flourished under careful tending, producing radishes and greens that supplemented their meals. A small library was established in one classroom, stocked with donated books in Japanese and English. Someone found an old radio that Corporal Washington repaired, and on certain evenings, music filled the common areas, both American swing and Japanese folk songs, creating a strange but not unpleasant hybrid of cultures. Keiko's friendship with Yumiko deepened into something sisterly. They shared their histories in small increments, pieces of their former lives doled out like precious currency. Yumiko had been a student when the recruiters came, promising her family that she would work in a textile factory and send money home. Her parents, farmers struggling with debt, had believed the promise, had celebrated what they thought was their daughter's good fortune. "They didn't know," Yumiko said one evening, as they sat by the window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I wrote letters at first, but they were censored. Anything that told the truth was destroyed. So I stopped writing. Let them think I was just ungrateful, just selfish. Better than knowing." "Do you think you'll try to find them?" Keiko asked gently. Yumiko was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. What would I say? How could I walk back into that village, into that house, carrying what I carry now? They would see it on me. Everyone would know." It was a fear many of the women shared, the terror of judgment, of being blamed for their own victimization, of being treated as contaminated rather than as survivors. Japanese society had little sympathy for women in their position. The comfort station system had been an open secret, supported by the military and tolerated by civilians who didn't want to think too hard about what it meant. Now, in defeat, would anyone want to be reminded of what had been done in the name of empire? Michiko had received word about her family in Hiroshima. The news came through official channels, the Red Cross working in coordination with Japanese relief organizations. Her parents and younger brother had survived the bomb, though her father had been badly burned. They were living in a temporary shelter on the outskirts of the ruined city. When Sergeant Tanaka delivered the news, Michiko collapsed in tears that were equal parts relief and grief. "I can arrange for you to travel there," Tanaka said, "whenever you're ready." But Michiko hesitated. What if they're ashamed of me? What if they don't want me back?" It was Dorothy who sat with her that night, talking quietly while the translator conveyed their conversation. Your family believed you were working in a factory. They had no reason to doubt that. Everyone believed those lies. When you return, you can tell them as much or as little as you want. But they deserve to see that you're alive. And you deserve to know that you have a home to return to. Michiko left the facility 2 weeks later, escorted by a Red Cross worker who would ensure her safe passage. The women gathered to see her off, each offering small gifts. A bar of soap, a handkerchief, a handful of coins. Keiko gave her a drawing she had made of cherry blossoms, something to remind Michiko of beauty, even in the midst of devastation. "Write to us," Yumiko said, squeezing Michiko's hand. "Tell us how you are." "I will," Michiko promised, tears streaming down her face. Then she was gone, climbing into a jeep that would take her to the train station, beginning a journey back toward the life that had been interrupted. Current word count, 4,926 words. Not everyone wanted to return home. For some, the facility represented not just a refuge but a chance to reimagine themselves entirely. Yumiko, the practical gardener, had no family to return to. Her parents had died years before, and she had no siblings. When asked about her plans, she said, "I want to stay in the city, find work, build something new." The Americans had begun employing some of the women in various capacities, not as servants or in any role that could be construed as exploitative, but as translators, clerks, kitchen staff, and liaisons with the Japanese community. The positions came with salaries, modest but regular, and the dignity of chosen work. Yumiko applied for a position in the administrative office and was hired almost immediately. She had a neat hand and a methodical mind, and she took to the work with quiet satisfaction. "I'm good at this," she told Keiko one day, showing her a perfectly organized filing system she had created. "I'm actually good at something besides surviving." Other conflicts arose, more subtle but no less significant. Some of the women struggled with the food, which mixed American and Japanese elements in ways that satisfied no one completely. Others chafed at the rules, benign as they were, after so long having no agency. A few women, traumatized beyond what the facility could address, suffered breakdowns that required more intensive medical care. And there were tensions within the community of women themselves. Years of brutal competition in the comfort stations, where favor with a particular officer might mean slightly better treatment or where resources had been so scarce that sharing became impossible, had taught some women to trust no one. Arguments erupted over small things. A borrowed comb not returned, a seat taken at a meal, a perceived slight or snub. Mrs. Nakamura held group sessions to address these conflicts, teaching the women skills they had been denied. How to communicate needs without aggression, how to set boundaries without expecting violence in return, how to trust again in incremental steps. It was slow work, tedious and often frustrating, but gradually the community began to knit itself together more firmly. Keiko found herself taking on an informal leadership role, though she never sought it. She mediated disputes when they arose, listened when women needed to talk, and offered practical help, teaching English phrases she had learned, sharing gardening techniques, simply sitting with someone who couldn't bear to be alone. She didn't think of herself as particularly strong or wise, but others seemed to see something in her that they needed. "You have a calmness about you," Haruko told her one day. Haruko, the oldest among them and one of the most visibly scarred, had become something of a mother figure to the younger women. "Even when you're afraid, you don't let it control you. That's rare." Keiko didn't feel calm. She felt like she was barely holding herself together most days, like the slightest pressure might crack her completely. But she appreciated Haruko's words, stored them away as evidence that perhaps she was stronger than she believed. Current word count, 5,512 words. 3 months into their stay, something unexpected happened. Japanese civilians began visiting the facility. At first, it was just a few women from a local church who had heard about the shelter and wanted to offer support. They brought donations, clothing, books, small treats like candies and dried fruit. Their gestures were cautious, uncertain, marked by the shame of what had been done in their country's name. One older woman, Mrs. Yamamoto, approached Keiko in the garden one afternoon. "I had a daughter," she said quietly. "She was taken in 1943. Promised work in Osaka. I never saw her again. Her voice broke. When I heard about this place, about women like you being helped, I had to come. I had to do something, even if it's too late for my daughter. Keiko didn't know what to say. There were no words adequate to such loss. So instead, she took Mrs. Yamamoto's hand and led her to a bench beneath a newly planted cherry tree. A sapling that wouldn't bloom for years, but that represented hope nonetheless. They sat together in silence, two women connected by the same system of violence. One as a victim, one as a mourner of a victim. Other Japanese civilians were less sympathetic. Some saw the women at the facility as national embarrassments, shameful reminders of defeat. There were incidents. Angry men shouting from outside the gates, accusing the women of consorting with the enemy, of betraying Japan. The American guards intervened swiftly, but the words still landed like blows. "How dare they?" Yumiko said after one such incident, her body shaking with rage. "How dare they blame us for what was done to us? We didn't betray Japan. Japan betrayed us." It was one of the most complex aspects of their situation. Trying to heal while living in the country that had brutalized them, among people who couldn't decide whether to pity them or condemn them. The Americans offered protection and resources, but they were also occupiers, representatives of the power that had dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that had reduced cities to ash and trauma. Navigating these contradictions required a moral flexibility that was exhausting. Sergeant Tanaka, perhaps more aware of these contradictions than most, tried to bridge the divide. He organized meetings between the facility residents and sympathetic Japanese community leaders, teachers, religious figures, businessmen who were beginning to rebuild. These meetings were awkward at first, marked by long silences and carefully worded statements that said much while revealing little. But gradually, connections formed. A school principal invited some of the women to help teach children whose schools had been destroyed. A local shop owner offered job training to women interested in learning a trade. A doctor volunteered his services, supplementing the American medical staff with expertise in Japanese healing practices. Keiko participated in the teaching program, going twice a week to a makeshift school where children learned lessons in a building that had once been a factory. The children were wary at first, made suspicious by wartime propaganda and the uncertainty of occupation. But children are resilient and adaptable, and soon they were running up to Keiko with questions and stories, treating her like any other teacher. "Miss Keiko, can you teach us an English song?" One girl asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Keiko thought of the songs Helen had taught her in class. She settled on "You Are My Sunshine," a simple melody with words about love and hope. As she sang it in halting English, then translated the meaning into Japanese, she watched the children's faces light up with wonder. They joined in, their high voices stumbling over the foreign syllables, laughing at their mistakes but trying again. In that moment, standing in a room full of children who represented Japan's future, Keiko felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was contributing. She was building something, however small, that might outlast the war and its aftermath. The turning point came in November, for months after the facility had opened. An American journalist arrived, a woman named Margaret Bowman who wrote for a major newspaper back in the States. She had been covering the occupation and had heard rumors about the comfort station system, about the scope of the atrocities committed against women throughout the Japanese Empire. Sergeant Tanaka called a meeting to explain her presence. "Miss Bowman wants to write about what happened to you. She believes the American public needs to know the truth about the comfort station system. But this is entirely voluntary. No one is required to speak with her. No one is required to share anything they're not comfortable sharing." The women were divided. Some, like Haruko, were eager to speak, wanting their stories documented, wanting the world to know. Others, like Yumiko, were terrified at the prospect of their experiences becoming public knowledge, afraid of shame and judgment, and the impossibility of ever returning to normal life if their identities were revealed. Margaret Bowman was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. But there was kindness there too, and a respect that put some of the women at ease. She conducted interviews in a quiet room with only a translator present, and she began each session by saying, "You are in control. You can stop at any time. You can share as much or as little as you want. And if you wish, your name can be kept anonymous." Keiko decided to speak with her. She wasn't sure why, perhaps because she had been thinking about Michiko's return to her family, about the possibility that truth-telling might be a form of liberation. Or perhaps because she had seen how the American soldiers responded when they understood what had happened, and she thought maybe others could learn the same compassion. She sat across from Margaret in the small room, her hands folded in her lap around her grandmother's comb, her anchor always. The translator, a gentle woman named Keiko, sat to one side. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Margaret began, her voice soft. "Can you tell me your story? Start wherever feels right." Keiko took a breath. Then she began to speak. She told Margaret about her village, about being 17 and believing the recruiters who promised factory work and good wages. She described the journey to Manila, the realization that the promises were lies, the first night in the comfort station when she understood what her life would become. She spoke about the officers who used her, about the quota system, 20-30 men per day, about the medical examinations that treated her body like a piece of equipment to be maintained. She told Margaret about the other women, some who had been kidnapped outright, others who had been sold by desperate families, still others who had been promised safety and found only violation. She described the suicides, the women who couldn't survive what was being done to them and who found the only escape available. She talked about the forced abortions, the diseases, the violence that was casual and constant. And she told Margaret about the small acts of resistance and humanity that had kept her alive. A whispered conversation with another woman during a brief moment alone, a guard who had once let her rest when she was ill, the silent solidarity that bound the comfort women together even when they competed for scraps of mercy. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face, and Margaret's eyes were red-rimmed too. The translator, Keiko, had to pause several times to compose herself. "I'm so sorry," Margaret said, and it didn't sound like a platitude. It sounded like genuine grief for all that had been lost. "Thank you for trusting me with this. The world needs to know. People need to understand what was done, and they need to understand that you survived it." Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret interviewed 15 women who volunteered to share their stories. Some spoke on the record, giving their names and faces to accompany their testimonies. Others chose anonymity, wanting their stories told but not wanting to be personally identified. Margaret documented everything with meticulous care: dates, locations, names of officers when they were known, descriptions of the stations and the systems that had enabled mass sexual slavery. She also interviewed the American soldiers, asking them about their reactions when they first encountered comfort women, about the protocols they had developed for the facility, about what they thought the U.S. military's responsibility was in addressing these war crimes. Corporal Washington told her, "We liberated concentration camps in Europe. We saw what the Nazis did to the Jews, to political prisoners, to anyone they considered undesirable. This is the same thing, systematic dehumanization and abuse. These women deserved better from their own country, and they deserve better from us now." Private Miller, blushing furiously but speaking with conviction, said, "My commanding officer told us on day one, these women have been through hell. Our job is to prove that not all men are monsters. I hope we're doing that. I hope they can see that someone cares about what happened to them." Sergeant Tanaka's interview was the longest. He spoke about growing up as a Japanese American, about the internment camps where his family had been held during the war, about his complicated relationship with both his heritage and his adopted country. "I see these women, and I see my mother, my aunts, my sisters," he said. "The Japanese military stole their humanity. We're trying to give it back. It's the least we can do." Margaret's article was published in December. It ran on the front page of her newspaper with the headline, "Japan's Comfort Women: The Untold Story of Systematic Rape as a Weapon of War." The article was detailed, unflinching in its description of the comfort station system, and it named the practice for what it was. Not a comfort system, not a necessary evil, but organized sexual slavery on a massive scale. The response was immediate and explosive. Other newspapers picked up the story. Editorials debated the implications. Some Americans were shocked, claiming they had no idea such atrocities had occurred. Others demanded that Japanese officials be held accountable, just as Nazi war criminals were being prosecuted in Europe. Still others questioned why the American military hadn't done more to stop the system during the war, or why it hadn't been discussed at the surrender negotiations. In Japan, the reaction was more muted but no less significant. The article was translated and circulated, though some newspapers refused to print it, calling it propaganda designed to shame the Japanese people in their defeat. But others ran with it, adding their own investigations, interviewing former comfort station operators and military officials who confirmed the system's scope. The women at the facility watched these developments with mixed emotions. Some felt vindicated, grateful that their suffering was being acknowledged and documented. Others felt exposed, vulnerable to judgment and blame despite Margaret's careful framing of them as victims rather than collaborators. Keiko received a letter, forwarded through the Red Cross, from her family. Her mother had read about the comfort women in a local newspaper. She didn't explicitly say she knew Keiko had been one of them, but the subtext was clear. "We have heard terrible things about what happened to girls who were taken for factory work. If you are alive, please come home. We love you. We miss you. Whatever has happened, you are still our daughter." Keiko read the letter a dozen times, searching for judgment or blame and finding only love and loss. She carried it with her for days before making a decision. "I'm going to go home," she told Yumiko one evening. "Not forever, maybe just for a visit. But I need to see them. I need to know if it's possible to go back." Yumiko nodded, understanding the weight of that decision. "Will you come back here?" "I don't know," Keiko admitted. "But wherever I end up, I want you to come with me. We're sisters now. I'm not leaving you behind." Keiko, a Japanese comfort woman, returns home after World War II, expecting exploitation but finding unexpected compassion from American soldiers running a rehabilitation facility. Reuniting with her family brings bittersweet healing. She's welcomed with love, but feels the weight of village judgment. Unable to reclaim her old life, she returns to Yokohama with fellow survivor Yumiko. Together, they build new futures. Keiko teaches and documents comfort women's testimonies, while Yumiko opens a school for women. Their journey proves that healing is possible after trauma, and that people can choose kindness even after witnessing cruelty. Subscribe to Stories of Humanity, where silence is never forgotten and resilience finds its voice.